I was just a young woman of 25 when I married Mike. He seemed perfect, handsome, successful, and so attentive. We had a beautiful wedding and settled into what I thought was marital bliss. I threw myself into being the best wife I could be, always making sure our home was spotless and there was a hot meal waiting when Mike got home from work. Within a few years, we had two adorable children, Emily and Ethan. I loved being a mom more than anything. Sure, it was exhausting at times juggling the kids, the housework, and my part-time job as an accountant. But Mike's career as a sales manager was really taking off, so I was happy to take on more of the domestic duties to support him. Our life looked picture perfect from the outside. We had a lovely home in a good neighborhood, took nice family vacations, and seemed to have it all. I was so proud when we celebrated our 10th wedding anniversary with a big party surrounded by family and friends. Mike gave a beautiful toast about how lucky he was to have me as his wife. I felt like the luckiest woman in the world. At work, I had developed a reputation for my sharp eye and attention to detail when it came to financial records and bookkeeping. My boss often praised me for catching small discrepancies that others missed. I took pride in my skills, but I never imagined I'd need to use them in my personal life. Looking back now, I can see there were little signs that things weren't as perfect as they seemed. Mike started working later and later, saying he had to wine and dine important clients. The business trips became more frequent. He was always distracted, constantly checking his phone. But I brushed off my concerns, telling myself I was just being paranoid. I remember the moment everything changed so clearly. It was an ordinary Tuesday evening. I was folding laundry while the kids played in the next room. I picked up Mike's pants to empty the pockets before washing them, and that's when I found it. A crumpled receipt from an upscale restaurant I'd never heard of. The date on the receipt was from the previous week, on a night Mike told me he was working late at the office. My stomach dropped as I saw the total, over $200 for dinner and drinks, far more than any normal business dinner. And at the bottom, a brief note scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting. "Thanks for a lovely evening, EXO." I sat there frozen, receipt clutched in my shaking hand. As my mind raced, there had to be an explanation, right? Maybe it was a team dinner he forgot to mention, or a last-minute meeting with an important client. I desperately wanted to believe the best, but deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted, and try as I might to ignore it, I knew things would never be the same. The perfect life I thought I had started to crumble around me. Little did I know, this receipt was just the beginning of uncovering a web of lies that would change everything. I tried to push that receipt out of my mind, but it was like a splinter I couldn't ignore. Over the next few weeks, I found myself watching Mike more closely, noticing little things I'd overlooked before, like how he'd turn away to answer texts, or how he'd get irritated if I asked about his day at work. One evening, as we were getting ready for bed, I casually asked, "Hey, how was that team dinner last week? The one at that new restaurant downtown?" My heart was pounding as I waited for his response. Mike barely looked up from his phone. "Oh, yeah, it was fine. Just the usual work stuff." I pressed a little further. "Which restaurant was it again? I'd love to try it sometime." He hesitated for a split second. I don't remember the name. Some Italian place. I think." I knew he was lying. The receipt I'd found was from a high-end steakhouse, but I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed more information. The next day, I was doing laundry when I noticed a faint, unfamiliar perfume on one of Mike's shirts. It wasn't anything I wore. I held the fabric to my nose, inhaling deeply. The scent was floral and expensive smelling. My stomach churned. "It's probably just from hugging a coworker," I told myself. But the doubt was growing stronger. That weekend, Mike said he had to go into the office to catch up on some work. It wasn't unusual. He often worked weekends. But this time, something felt off. I decided to surprise him with lunch. When I arrived at his office building, the security guard looked confused. "Mr. Thompson, he hasn't been in all day," he said. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I mumbled something about mixed signals and hurried back to my car, fighting back tears. When Mike came home that evening, I asked how his work went. He launched into a detailed story about a project he'd been working on. I nodded along, feeling sick as I listened to him lie so effortlessly. "Oh, I almost forgot," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I got you something." He handed me a small box from a local jewelry store. Inside was a beautiful pair of earrings. "Just because," he said with a smile. I thanked him, but the gift felt hollow. Was it a peace offering, a way to ease his guilt? As the days went by, I noticed more and more little things. Mike started taking more care with his appearance, buying new clothes and spending extra time grooming. He'd never cared much about fashion before. His phone became an extension of his hand. He was constantly texting, but would angle the screen away if I came near. Once, I caught a glimpse of a message notification. The name was simply A, with a heart emoji next to it. I told myself I was being paranoid, that all these little things had reasonable explanations. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. One night, I woke up to find Mike's side of the bed empty. I heard his voice downstairs, speaking in hushed tones. I crept to the top of the stairs to listen. "I miss you too," he was saying. I know. It's complicated. Just give me some time to figure things out, okay?" I retreated to our bedroom, my mind racing. Who was he talking to? What did he need to figure out? The next morning, I asked him about the call. He brushed it off, saying it was a work emergency, but I saw the flash of panic in his eyes before he composed himself. I wanted to believe him. I wanted so badly for everything to be okay. But the evidence was piling up, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. As I watched him leave for work that morning, briefcase in hand and a distracted kiss on my cheek, I made a decision. I couldn't live with this uncertainty anymore. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I sat down at our home computer and opened a new document. At the top, I typed, "Evidence of Mike's possible affair." Then, with shaking hands, I began to list everything I'd noticed over the past few weeks. The restaurant receipt, the late nights at work, the mysterious phone call, the new clothes, the secret texts. As I looked at it all laid out in black and white, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, fear, sadness. But most of all, I felt determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. Little did I know, my investigation was about to uncover far more than I ever imagined. As the weeks went by, my suspicions grew stronger, and the pit in my stomach deepened. I found myself constantly on edge, analyzing Mike's every move and word. It was exhausting, but I couldn't stop myself. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table with the kids, I noticed Mike checking his phone under the table. He had a small smile on his face as he typed out a quick response. "Who are you texting?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He looked up, startled. "Oh, just work stuff," he replied, quickly pocketing the phone. I nodded, but I didn't believe him. The Mike I knew would never smile like that over a work message. Later that night, I overheard him on the phone in his study. "I can't wait to see you tomorrow," he said in a low voice. "I've missed you so much." My heart raced. Who was he talking to? It certainly wasn't me he was missing. The next day, I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I waited until Mike left for work, then went into his study. I felt guilty as I opened his desk drawer, but I needed answers. Inside, I found a stack of credit card statements. As I flipped through them, my eyes widened. There were charges for expensive restaurants, hotels, and even a jewelry store, none of which I knew anything about. I sat there, staring at the papers, feeling like my whole world was crumbling around me. How long had this been going on? How could I have been so blind? That evening, when Mike came home, I watched him closely. He kissed me on the cheek and asked about my day, but his eyes kept darting to his phone. "How was your day?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Aikiyao, you know, the usual," he said vaguely. "Lots of meetings." I wanted to scream, to confront him with what I'd found, but something held me back. I needed more proof. I needed to be absolutely sure before I accused him of anything. Over the next few days, I noticed more and more little things. Mike started coming home later and later, always with excuses about work. He'd take calls in another room, speaking in hushed tones. And then there was the perfume, a scent I didn't recognize that sometimes clung to his clothes. One night, as we lay in bed, I turned to him. "Mike," I said softly, "is everything okay? You seem distant lately." He rolled over to face me, but I could see the guilt in his eyes. "Everything's fine," he said. "Just stressed about work, that's all." I nodded, but inside, my heart was breaking. I knew he was lying. I could feel it in my bones. The next day, I confided in my best friend Sarah. "I think Mike might be cheating on me," I whispered, tears in my eyes. Sarah hugged me tightly. "Oh, honey," she said. "Are you sure?" I told her everything. The mysterious phone calls, the credit card statements, the late nights at work. As I spoke, I could see the concern growing on her face. "You need to confront him," she said finally. "You can't go on like this." I knew she was right, but the thought terrified me. What if I was wrong? What if there was a perfectly innocent explanation for everything? But deep down, I knew. I knew that something was very, very wrong in my marriage. That night, as I watched Mike get ready for bed, I made a decision. I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. "Mike," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "we need to talk." He looked at me, surprise and a flicker of fear in his eyes. "About what?" I took a deep breath. "About us, about what's been going on lately." For a moment, he just stared at me. Then he sighed and sat down on the edge of the bed. "Okay," he said, "let's talk." As I looked into his eyes, I could see the guilt there, the knowledge that his secrets were about to come tumbling out. And in that moment, I knew that my life was about to change forever. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain: I deserved the truth. And I was finally ready to hear it, no matter how much it might hurt. After that night, I knew I couldn't just sit back and wait for the truth to reveal itself. I had to take matters into my own hands. So I decided to start my own investigation. It felt wrong, like I was betraying the trust in our marriage. But then again, hadn't Mike already done that? The next morning, after Mike left for work, I sat down at our home computer. My hands were shaking as I opened his email account. We had always shared passwords, a symbol of our openness with each other. How ironic that seemed now. At first glance, everything looked normal. Work emails, spam, newsletters. But then I noticed a folder labeled Personal. My heart raced as I clicked on it. Inside were dozens of emails from someone named Amber. As I read through them, my worst fears were confirmed. They were filled with intimate details, inside jokes, and plans for secret meetings. "Can't wait for our lunch date tomorrow," one read. "I've missed you so much." I felt sick to my stomach. How long had this been going on? How could I have been so blind? I printed out a few of the most damning emails, my mind racing with what to do next. Should I confront Mike right away or dig deeper? I decided to keep investigating. I needed to know everything before I made my next move. Over the next few days, I became a detective in my own home. I checked Mike's phone when he was in the shower, memorizing Amber's number. I went through his drawers, finding hotel receipts tucked away in an old sock. One day, while Mike was at work, I drove to his office. I sat in the parking lot watching. Around lunchtime, I saw him come out with a woman I didn't recognize. They got into his car together, laughing and talking intimately. I followed them to a small Italian restaurant. Through the window, I could see them holding hands across the table. My heart shattered into a million pieces. When Mike came home that evening, He kissed me on the cheek like nothing was wrong. "How was your day, honey?" he asked casually. I wanted to scream, to throw all the evidence in his face, but I held back. I wasn't ready for the confrontation. Not yet. "Oh, the usual," I replied, forcing a smile. "How about you?" "Busy day at the office," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Lots of meetings." I nodded, biting my tongue. Another lie to add to the growing list. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to Mike's steady breathing beside me. How could he sleep so peacefully while living such a huge lie? The next day, I decided to take my investigation further. I installed a tracking app on Mike's phone while he was in the shower. It felt like a violation of privacy, but I needed to know the truth. Over the next week, I watched as the app showed Mike's movements. Most days were as expected: home, office, home again. But twice, he went to an address I didn't recognize. Each time, he stayed for several hours. I looked up the address online. It was an apartment complex on the other side of town. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this where Amber lived? Or was it a secret love nest they shared? I knew I was getting close to the truth, but I needed one final piece of evidence. Something so irrefutable that Mike couldn't possibly deny it. So, I made a decision that went against everything I believed in. I hired a private investigator. The PI, a woman named Linda, listened to my story with sympathy. "I've seen this too many times," she said gently. "We'll get you the proof you need." For the next few days, Linda followed Mike. She took photos, recorded his movements, and gathered evidence. When she called me to say she had what I needed, I felt a mix of relief and dread. We met in a quiet coffee shop. Linda handed me a thick envelope. "Are you sure you want to see this?" she asked kindly. I nodded, my hands shaking as I opened the envelope. Inside were dozens of photos, Mike and Amber together, holding hands, kissing, entering the apartment I had seen on the tracking app. There it was, undeniable proof of Mike's betrayal. I thanked Linda, my voice hollow. As I drove home, the photos felt like they were burning a hole in my bag. I had what I needed now. There was no more room for doubt, no more excuses I could make for Mike's behavior. It was time to confront him, time to face the truth that I had been avoiding for so long. As I pulled into our driveway, I took a deep breath. Our life as we knew it was about to change forever, but I was ready to stand up for myself, ready to demand the truth. Little did I know, this confrontation would be just the beginning of a journey that would test my strength in ways I never imagined. As I sat in our living room, waiting for Mike to come home, my mind was racing. I had the envelope of photos clutched tightly in my hands, ready to confront him. But as the minutes ticked by, doubt began to creep in. What if I was jumping to conclusions? What if there was a reasonable explanation for all of this? I found myself hoping, against all logic, that I was wrong. When I heard Mike's key in the lock, my heart started pounding. He walked in, looking tired but smiling when he saw me. "Hey, honey," he said, leaning in to kiss me. I turned my cheek, unable to bear his touch. "Mike, we need to talk," I said, my voice shaking slightly. He looked at me, concern crossing his face. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath and opened the envelope. "Can you explain these?" I asked, spreading the photos on the coffee table. Mike's face went pale. He stared at the photos, then at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. It's not what it looks like," he stammered. I laughed bitterly. "Really? Because it looks like you're kissing another woman. It looks like you're going into an apartment with her. What else could it be, Mike?" He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing but now just irritated me. "And Amber she's just a friend, a colleague. We were working on a project together." I shook my head in disbelief. "Do you usually kiss your colleagues, Mike? Do you hold hands with them and sneak around behind your wife's back?" "No, of course not," he said quickly. It's complicated. We got close working together, but nothing serious happened. I swear. I wanted to believe him. Part of me was desperate to believe him, but the evidence was right there in front of us. What about the apartment? I asked. Why were you going there? Mike hesitated. It's her place. We needed somewhere quiet to work on the project. That's all. I stood up, anger bubbling inside me. Stop lying to me, Mike. I've seen the emails. I've seen the credit card statements. This isn't just some work project. He looked defeated. Okay. Amber and I, we got close, but it was just a few kisses. That's all. I swear nothing more happened. I felt like I was in a bizarre dream. How could he stand there and lie to my face like this? I don't believe you, I said quietly. I think there's more to this story. Mike's demeanor suddenly changed. He became defensive, almost angry. What? So you've been spying on me, going through my things. How could you invade my privacy like that? I was stunned by his audacity. How could I? How could you cheat on me, Mike? How could you betray our marriage? We argued back and forth, voices rising. Mike kept insisting it was just a harmless flirtation, that I was overreacting. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Finally, exhausted and emotional, I said, I think you should leave. I need some time to think. Mike looked shocked. Leave? But where am I supposed to go? I don't know. And frankly, I don't care, I said coldly. Maybe you can go to Amber's apartment. He flinched at that, then nodded slowly. Okay, I'll go, but we need to talk about this more when things have calmed down. I watched him pack a bag, feeling numb. As he walked out the door, I half expected him to turn around, to confess everything and beg for forgiveness. But he didn't. He just left. The house felt eerily quiet after he was gone. I sat on the couch, staring at the photos spread out on the coffee table. Had I overreacted? Was it possible that Mike was telling the truth? Over the next few days, I oscillated between anger and doubt. Mike called and texted constantly, pleading for another chance to explain. I ignored most of his messages, but his words stuck with me. Maybe I had jumped to conclusions. Maybe there was more to the story. I found myself replaying every moment of our marriage, looking for signs I might have missed. Had there been clues all along that Mike was unhappy? Had I driven him to seek comfort elsewhere? One afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Amber. Please, just hear me out, she said when I tried to hang up. It's not what you think. Against my better judgment, I listened. Amber spun a tale of a purely platonic relationship, of Mike being a supportive friend during her divorce. She swore nothing physical had happened between them. I wanted to believe her. It would be so much easier if it were true, but something didn't add up. The photos, the secretive behavior, the lies, it all pointed to something more. As I hung up the phone, I felt more confused than ever. Had I made a terrible mistake? Or was I being manipulated by two skilled liars? I spent hours going over the evidence again, looking for something I might have missed. But the more I looked, the more convinced I became that my initial instincts were right. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't let doubt cloud my judgment. I knew what I had seen, what I had uncovered. It was time to trust myself and face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. After a sleepless night, I woke up with a newfound determination. I couldn't let Mike and Amber's story sway me. I needed concrete proof, one way or the other. It was time to step up my investigation. I started by revisiting Mike's email account. This time, I dug deeper, looking for any hidden folders or archived messages. That's when I stumbled upon a series of deleted emails between Mike and Amber. My hands shook as I recovered them. My darling. One of Mike's emails read, I can't wait to hold you in my arms again. These stolen moments are never enough. My stomach churned as I read through message after message. They were filled with intimate details and future plans, far more than just a friendly flirtation. But I needed more. I remembered how my boss always said, follow the money. So I decided to take a closer look at our finances. I spent hours poring over bank statements and credit card bills. That's when I noticed something odd. Regular cash withdrawals from our joint account that I couldn't account for. They always happened on days when Mike claimed to be working late. My mind raced. Was he using this cash to wine and dine Amber? To buy her gifts? The thought made me feel sick. I needed a break from the emotional toll of my discoveries. So I called my friend Sarah and asked if she wanted to grab coffee. As we sat in our favorite cafe, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I spilled everything. Sarah listened intently, her face a mix of shock and sympathy. When I finished, she squeezed my hand. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. But you know what? You're stronger than this. You'll get through it." Her words gave me strength. She was right, I was stronger than this, and I would prove it. Back at home, I decided to try something new. I remembered Mike mentioning a cloud storage account where he kept work files. On a hunch, I logged in. What I found made my blood run cold. There were dozens of photos of Mike and Amber together, at beaches, restaurants, even in hotel rooms. They looked happy, carefree, in love. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't just some fling or a moment of weakness. This was a full-blown affair. As I scrolled through the photos, a notification popped up. Mike had just uploaded a new file. With trembling fingers, I clicked on it. It was a video. I hesitated before playing it, knowing it might break me, but I had to know the truth. The video started playing. It showed Mike and Amber in what looked like a hotel room. They were laughing, drinking champagne. Then Mike got down on one knee and pulled out a ring. "Amber," he said, "I love you. Will you marry me?" I watched in horror as Amber squealed with delight and threw her arms around Mike. They kissed passionately, oblivious to the fact that their moment of joy was shattering my world. I slammed the laptop shut, tears streaming down my face. How could he do this? How could he propose to another woman while still married to me? In that moment, something inside me snapped. The last shred of doubt, the last hint of hope that this was all a misunderstanding, vanished. I knew the truth now, in all its ugly glory. I picked up my phone and dialed Mike's number. When he answered, I could hear the nervousness in his voice. "We need to talk," I said, my voice cold and steady. "Come home now." "I'm in the middle of a meeting," he started to say, but I cut him off. "Now, Mike. Or should I call Amber and ask her to pass on the message?" There was a long silence on the other end. Then, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I waited for Mike to arrive, I gathered all the evidence I had collected. The emails, the bank statements, the photos. I laid them out on the dining room table, a damning display of his betrayal. When I heard his key in the lock, I steeled myself. This was it, the moment of truth. No more lies, no more excuses. Mike walked in, his face a mask of guilt and fear. He looked at the evidence spread out on the table, then at me. "Sit down," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "We have a lot to talk about." As Mike sank into a chair, looking defeated, I felt a strange sense of power. For the first time in weeks, I was in control, and I was ready to hear the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As Mike sat across from me, his eyes darting between my face and the evidence spread out on the table, I felt a surge of anger and determination. This was it, the moment of truth. "Start talking," I said, my voice steadier than I felt inside. Mike ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing but now just irritated me. I don't know where to begin," he stammered. "How about the truth?" I snapped. "For once in your life, Mike, just tell me the truth." He took a deep breath. "Okay, yes, I've been seeing Amber. It started about 6 months ago. We met at a conference and things just happened." I laughed bitterly. "Things just happened for 6 months? That's not just happening, Mike. That's a choice. A series of choices you made every single day." He nodded, looking ashamed. "You're right, I'm sorry, I never meant for it to go this far." "But it did," I said, pushing the photos towards him. "You proposed to her, Mike. Were you planning to divorce me? Or were you just going to keep lying to both of us?" Mike's face paled as he saw the proposal video screenshot. How did you? It doesn't matter how I know, I cut him off. What matters is that you've been living a double life. You've been lying to me, to our children, to everyone. Tears welled up in his eyes. I'm so sorry, I never wanted to hurt you. His words ignited a fire in me. You never wanted to hurt me. Then why did you do it? Why wasn't I enough for you? It's not like that, he protested weakly. You are enough, it's me. I got caught up in the excitement, the newness. Amber made me feel young again. I stood up, unable to contain my anger. And I made you feel old, is that it? Our life, our family, it was all just too boring for you? Mike reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away. No, that's not what I meant. I love our life, our family. I made a mistake. A mistake? I echoed incredulously. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on the way home. This is a betrayal, Mike. You've destroyed everything we built together. He buried his face in his hands. I know. God, I know. I've ruined everything. But please, can we try to work this out? For the kids? I felt a cold fury wash over me. Don't you dare use our children as an excuse. You should have thought about them before you started this affair. Mike looked up at me, his eyes pleading. What can I do? Tell me how to fix this. I shook my head. I don't think you can fix this, Mike. Some things, once broken, can't be put back together. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our crumbling marriage hanging heavy in the air. Then, I asked the question that had been burning in my mind. Do you love her? Mike hesitated, and in that hesitation, I had my answer. I think I do, he finally admitted. But I love you too. I love our family. His words felt like a knife to my heart. You can't have both, Mike. You have to choose. He looked at me, tears streaming down his face. I don't know if I can. In that moment, something inside me hardened. I realized that I deserved better than this. Better than a man who couldn't choose between his wife and his mistress. Then I'll choose for you, I said, my voice cold. I want a divorce. Mike's eyes widened in shock. A divorce? But what about the kids? What about our life together? You should have thought about that before you started sleeping with Amber, I replied. I can't stay in a marriage with someone I can't trust, someone who can look me in the eye and lie to me day after day. Mike stood up, reaching for me. Please, can we just talk about this? Maybe we can work it out. Go to counseling or something. I stepped back, out of his reach. There's nothing to work out, Mike. You made your choice when you bought that ring for Amber. Now, you have to live with the consequences. As I watched Mike's face crumple, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, but also a strange sense of relief. The truth was finally out. There were no more lies, no more pretending. I think you should leave, I said quietly. I felt a spark of determination growing inside me. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning, and I was going to make sure it was a beginning on my terms. Little did I know, the journey ahead would be even more challenging and ultimately more rewarding than I could have ever imagined. After Mike left, I sat on the floor for what felt like hours, my mind reeling from everything that had just happened. The house was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the emotional storm raging inside me. Finally, I picked myself up, wiped my tears, and decided it was time to take action. I called Sarah, my voice shaking as I recounted the confrontation. "Oh, honey," she said, her voice filled with concern. "I'm coming over right now. You shouldn't be alone." While waiting for Sarah, I started gathering all the evidence I had collected. Emails, bank statements, photos. I organized everything meticulously. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. Sarah arrived with ice cream and a fierce determination to help. As we sat on the couch, I poured out every detail of my discovery and the confrontation with Mike. "You did the right thing," Sarah assured me, squeezing my hand. "Now we need to plan your next steps." Over the next few hours, we made lists, researched divorce lawyers, and talked through every possible scenario. It was overwhelming, but having Sarah there made me feel less alone. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose. I had an appointment with a highly recommended divorce attorney, Linda Goldstein. As I got dressed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. My eyes were puffy from crying, but there was a determination in them that I hadn't seen in a long time. At the law office, Linda listened intently as I presented my case, laying out all the evidence I had gathered. Her eyes widened as she went through the documents. "Well," she said, looking up at me, "you've certainly done your homework. This is more than enough to proceed with a divorce on grounds of adultery." I felt a mix of vindication and sadness hearing those words. "What happens now?" I asked. Linda leaned forward, her eyes kind but determined. "Now, we fight for what you deserve. Given the extent of his infidelity and the evidence you've gathered, we're in a strong position to negotiate a favorable settlement." As we discussed the legal process, a part of me still couldn't believe this was happening, but another part, a stronger part, knew this was the right path forward. After leaving Linda's office, I decided to face another difficult task, telling our children, Emily and Ethan, were staying with my parents, blissfully unaware of the turmoil in their parents' lives. The thought of shattering their world made my heart ache, but I knew I had to be honest with them. I picked them up from my parents' house, trying to keep a brave face. As we sat in our living room, I took a deep breath. "Kids, I need to talk to you about something important," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "Daddy and I, we're going to be living apart for a while." Emily, always perceptive, looked at me with worry. "Are you and Daddy getting a divorce?" I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. "Yes, sweetie, we are. But I want you both to know that this doesn't change how much we love you." Ethan, my little boy, climbed into my lap. "But why, Mommy? Don't you love Daddy anymore?" His innocent question broke my heart. How could I explain adult problems to my children without burdening them? "Sometimes," I said carefully, "grown-ups realize they can't be happy together anymore. But that doesn't mean we stop being a family. We'll just be a different kind of family now." As I held my children, answering their questions as best I could, I felt a mix of guilt and relief. Guilt for disrupting their lives, but relief that I was being honest with them. That night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at my phone. I knew I had to do one more thing: confront Amber. With shaking hands, I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. "Hello." Her voice was cautious. "Amber, this is Mike's wife," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I think it's time we talked." There was a long pause. I'm so sorry," she finally said. "I never meant for any of this to happen." I laughed bitterly. That seems to be the theme, but it did happen, and now we all have to deal with the consequences. We talked for nearly an hour. Amber cried, apologized, tried to explain. But as I listened to her words, I realized something important. This wasn't about her. It wasn't even about Mike anymore. This was about me, and what I needed to do to move forward. "Amber," I said, cutting off another apology, "I don't forgive you. I don't know if I ever will, but I'm not going to let what you and Mike did destroy me. I'm stronger than that." As I hung up the phone, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The confrontation was over. The truth was out. Now, it was time to focus on the future, my future and my children's future. I went to bed that night feeling drained but oddly peaceful. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for the first time in months, I felt ready to face them. This wasn't the end of my story, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. The days following my confrontations with Mike and Amber were a blur of legal meetings, tearful conversations with family and friends, and sleepless nights. Despite my determination to stay strong, I found myself slipping into a deep depression. One morning, I woke up and couldn't find the energy to get out of bed. The weight of everything, The betrayal, the impending divorce, the uncertain future felt crushing. I called in sick to work and pulled the covers over my head, shutting out the world. Hours passed. My phone buzzed with messages from concerned friends and family, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. What could I say? That I was falling apart, that I felt like a failure. As I lay there, memories of my life with Mike played through my mind like a bittersweet movie. Our first date, our wedding day, the birth of our children. Had it all been a lie? Had he ever really loved me? Doubt began to creep in. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe if I had been a better wife, more attentive, more exciting, Mike wouldn't have strayed. The rational part of me knew these thoughts were unfair, but I couldn't shake them. Days blurred together. I went through the motions for the kids' sake, making sure they were fed and got to school, but inside I felt hollow. The house that had once been full of laughter now felt like a mausoleum of my failed marriage. Sarah came by often, bringing food and offering support. "You need to talk to someone," she urged gently. "A therapist could really help." I nodded, but didn't make the call. What was the point? No amount of talking could change what had happened. One afternoon, as I sat staring blankly at the TV, Emily approached me cautiously. "Mommy," she said, her voice small. "Are you okay? You seem so sad all the time." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I realized that in my own pain, I had been neglecting my children's emotional needs. I pulled Emily into a tight hug, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry." "Sweetie," I whispered, "Mommy's just going through a tough time, but I promise I'll be okay." That night, I lay awake, Emily's worried face haunting me. I had always prided myself on being a strong, independent woman. When had I become this shell of a person, barely able to function? The next morning, I forced myself to get up early. I showered, put on makeup, and made a proper breakfast for the kids. It was exhausting, but seeing their surprised smiles made it worth the effort. After dropping them off at school, I finally made the call to a therapist Sarah had recommended. The receptionist's cheerful voice grated on my nerves, but I managed to schedule an appointment for the following week. As the days passed, I oscillated between moments of determination and crushing despair. One minute, I'd be planning my new life as a single mom. The next, I'd be sobbing over old photo albums. The night before my therapy appointment, I had a dream that shook me to my core. In it, I was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at the churning waves below. Mike appeared beside me, holding Amber's hand. "You'll never make it without me," he said, his voice cold. "You're nothing." I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. As I lay there in the dark, I realized that Mike's words in the dream were my own fears given voice. Did I really believe I was nothing without him? The thought made me angry at Mike for his betrayal, angry at myself for letting his actions define me. I got up and went to the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed like a stranger, pale, with dark circles under her eyes and a defeated slump to her shoulders. Where was the strong, confident woman I used to be? In that moment, I made a decision. I couldn't continue like this. For my own sake, and for my children, I had to find a way to move forward. I took a deep breath and spoke to my reflection. "You are not nothing," I said firmly. "You are strong, you are capable, and you will get through this." The words felt hollow at first, but as I repeated them, I felt a tiny spark of the old me flickering to life. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The next morning, I went to my therapy appointment. As I sat in the waiting room, I felt a mix of anxiety and hope. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't stay in this dark place any longer. When the therapist called my name, I stood up on shaky legs. This was it. The first step towards healing, towards reclaiming my life. As I followed her into her office, I silently promised myself that no matter how hard it might be, I would keep moving forward. Little did I know, This decision would be the turning point in my journey, the moment when I began to rediscover my strength and rebuild my life on my own terms. As I stepped out of my therapist's office after our first session, I felt a strange mix of exhaustion and hope. Dr. Peterson had been kind but firm, helping me see that my feelings were valid, but also challenging me to move forward. "Healing is a journey," she'd said, "and you've taken the first step." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into therapy and self-improvement. I started journaling, pouring out my feelings onto paper. I joined a support group for divorced women, finding comfort in sharing my story with others who understood. One day, as I was organizing some old files, I came across my college diploma. I ran my fingers over the embossed letters, remembering the ambitious young woman I'd been. What had happened to her dreams? That night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. "What do I want?" I wrote at the top. For hours, I brainstormed, letting myself dream big for the first time in years. The next morning, I called the local community college. "I'd like to inquire about your accounting courses," I said, my voice trembling with excitement. As I immersed myself in studies, I felt a part of me awakening that had long been dormant. The numbers made sense to me, offering a clarity that had been missing from my life. I started to see possibilities I'd never considered before. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings were moving forward. Each meeting with lawyers was draining, but I held my head high. I refused to let Mike see how much he had hurt me. One day, as I was leaving the lawyer's office, I ran into Amber in the parking lot. She looked nervous, avoiding my gaze. For a moment, I felt the old anger rising. But then, surprisingly, I felt pity. She was welcome to Mike. They deserved each other. "I hope you're happy together," I said calmly before walking away. The look of shock on her face was priceless. As months passed, I threw myself into creating a new life. I redecorated the house, erasing the traces of Mike. I started a small bookkeeping business, using my new skills to help local small businesses. The kids, after some initial struggles, began to adapt to our new normal. We had family meetings, where I encouraged them to express their feelings openly. It wasn't always easy, but we were growing closer through the challenges. One evening, as I was working on a client's books, I noticed some irregularities. Using the skills I'd learned, I dug deeper and uncovered a significant embezzlement scheme. The client was incredibly grateful, offering me a full-time position as their financial controller. As I considered the offer, I realized how far I'd come. From a heartbroken wife to a confident professional, I had reinvented myself. The thought filled me with pride. The final divorce hearing arrived sooner than I expected. As I sat in the courtroom, listening to the judge's ruling, I felt a sense of closure. The settlement was fair, thanks to the evidence I'd gathered and my lawyer's skill. Mike looked defeated as the judge spoke. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw regret in his gaze. But I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just a calm acceptance. As I left the courthouse, officially a divorced woman, I took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. A chapter of my life had closed, but a new one was just beginning. Over the next year, my life transformed, my business flourished, and I became known as the go-to person for uncovering financial discrepancies. I even started giving talks at local business groups about financial literacy. The kids were thriving too. Emily joined the debate team, her confidence soaring. Ethan discovered a passion for coding, spending hours creating simple games on the computer I'd bought him. One day, I received a surprising call. It was Mike. "I heard about your success," he said, his voice hesitant. I'm happy for you." I thanked him politely but kept the conversation short. His approval no longer meant anything to me. As I hung up, I realized something profound. The woman Mike had cheated on, the woman who had been broken by his betrayal, she no longer existed. In her place stood a stronger, wiser version of myself. That evening, As I helped Emily with her debate prep and listened to Ethan excitedly explain his latest coding project, I felt a wave of contentment wash over me. This was my life now, full of challenges, yes, but also full of joy and possibilities. Later, as I stood on our back porch, watching the sunset, I thought about the journey I'd been on. From the depths of despair to the heights of success, it had been a roller coaster ride, but I wouldn't change it for anything. I took out my phone and texted Sarah. "Dinner this weekend? I'm thinking of starting a nonprofit to help women achieve financial independence after divorce." Her reply came almost instantly. "I'm so proud of you. Count me in." As I looked out at the darkening sky, I smiled. Life hadn't turned out the way I'd planned, but maybe, just maybe, it had turned out better. I was no longer defined by my marriage or my divorce. I was defined by my strength, my resilience, and my determination to create a beautiful life for myself and my children. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all.